Hey, thanks for joining me for this lit review presentation on applying two-factor motivational theory to student affairs. So the outline for this presentation, of course, is going to provide you with some background on the student affairs profession, what the two-factor motivational theory is, how it can be applied, my three research questions, and of course, what the literature has shown regarding the application of this theory to understanding student affairs professional staff member motivation. Also, we'll discuss some inherent areas for improvement and future study. So generally when we think about student affairs, we are thinking about all the student support offices, the services and programs that aid in student development, growth, and support outside of the classroom. Now, most institutions of higher education have some variation in configuration of student affairs offices. Excuse me, but generally speaking, the major portfolio areas are academic services. This would include advising, tutoring, student success coaching, and the like. Enrollment services, this would be everything from your admissions and enrollment people to financial aid, orientation, and then even the coordination of graduation. Campus life, this is probably the most traditionally associated aspect of student affairs. This would include student activities, sorority, fraternity life, student conduct and discipline, your student union, student center, leadership programs, and things like that. Counseling, health and wellness, this would include everything from career services, mental health counseling, health programs, such as your campus physicians, and of course, wellness education. Diversity and inclusion, you will find your multicultural services here, international student services, study abroad, even your disability support service programs would be included under this umbrella. Residence life is going to be focused on the on-campus residential experience of students who are living in campus housing or campus-sponsored housing. And then, of course, sports and recreation would be everything that's your physical activity. So your campus rec center, your intramural programs, fitness classes. This may even include athletic programs depending upon the institution. Now, to understand student affairs, generally professionals are entering the field having completed a master's level graduate program. Graduate programs are anywhere from a year to 2 years long, depending upon the intensity of the program. Now, within this field, research is finding that 50, even upwards of 60% of individuals are leaving the field within their first 5 years of employment. Now, a lot of the research has just focused on figuring out why. Why are people leaving? And the most common cited aspects of departure are related to upward mobility. Individuals just feel that they do not have a professional career trajectory where they can be promoted or increase levels of responsibility. Pay is notoriously low in student affairs. It is not a profession in which people go to make big dollars or find a lucrative career. Job insecurity. This is a real one as institutions are constantly getting the finger pointed at them for administrative bloat. Student affairs programs and services are often some of the first to be reduced or cut. And then, of course, long hours. The student affairs profession is not your typical 9 to 5 job. Long days, long hours, evening commitments, weekend commitments that last throughout the year. Now, in looking at Herzberg's theory, this was based upon 200 qualitative interviews that he conducted back in 1959. Now, Frederick Herzberg's theory posits a motivator factor implication and a hygiene factor implication. Now, hygiene factor is not related to how clean your teeth are or how good you smell. The hygiene factors are kind of the maintenance things that need to be attended to within the work environment. So motivator factors would include everything from personal achievement, recognition at work, the actual work itself, levels of responsibility, advancement, career growth. As Semrich and Peterson say, these are really the internal states of mind. Now, the hygiene factors are, maybe some of the more recognizable things. So your relationship with your peers and your supervisor, the organizational policies, How political is the environment, salary and benefits. Some of the authors categorize hygiene factors as the threat variables, the reward or threat variables. These are the things that you focus on when you want to get someone to do something. Now, again, hygiene factors, again, are reward and threat variables such as pay, relationships in the workplace, job security, etc. They do work independently of motivator factors, the variables that are considered the internal states of mind. So, in other words, while the presence of motivator factors is demonstrated to increase employee motivation, the absence of these factors is not explicitly tied to employee dissatisfaction. So, one could be in an occupational role that does not provide opportunities for advancement, or perhaps the work is not necessarily rewarding or satisfying, yet the employee remains satisfied and motivated in their position. Now, conversely, the presence of hygiene factors is not proven to increase motivation, but the absence of these factors is shown to increase levels of dissatisfaction. So, one may have a good relationship with their supervisor and colleague, but that does not have an impact on the employee's job satisfaction or motivation. However, if there's no relationship or even a bad relationship at that, the absence of positive relationship, if you will, with the peer supervision, salary, things like that, does in fact increase employee dissatisfaction. So why this theory in this profession? As previously stated, up to 60% of professional staff members entering the field of student affairs are departing within their first 5 years. Again, contemporary research has focused on the reasons why someone leaves. Usually it's the absence of something, such as, again, those normal working hours, a pay that reflects all those working hours that have been done, upward mobility with their career, etc. Very, very, very few studies out there looking at why someone remains in their career when overall the attrition variables are overwhelmingly pervasive and present. So a recognition of what variables are leading to employee motivation, satisfaction, and ultimately career commitment can help inform leaders to create cultures and workspaces that support and emphasize those variables. Now, given the dualism of this approach, Herzberg's theory is, what creates satisfaction and what creates dissatisfaction. The two-factor theory is an ideal first step approach and application to learning more. Similarly, a knowledge of factors that lead to career commitment and departure can help inform the professional practice, the field of student affairs. So my 3 research questions here. So the first one, if you look at this, are the intrinsic variables really all that are at play when it comes to student affairs professionals finding satisfaction, motivation, and continued commitment to their careers? Secondly, do hygiene factors really breed enough dissatisfaction to negatively influence satisfaction, motivation, and career commitment? And then finally, is the two-factor theory a suitable application? Is this the right thing to be using to address this problem within the student affairs profession? This literature review is broken down into 4 subcategories. The first, Massey and Cook looked at the impact of transformational and transactional leadership styles on subordinate motivation and work commitment within the United States Army. Now, in a sample of over 2,500 enlisted service members, positive relation was identified between transformational leadership style and follower motivation. Through their study, tenets of transactional leadership also arose, also demonstrating a negative association between leader and follower. Transformational leadership theory exists when leaders, of course, are relying on the emotions, the values, ethics, and standards to assess their followers' motives towards developing the whole person. Whereas transactional leadership theory focuses more on a quid pro quo approach to getting things done. So here we see Massey and Cook's study supports the tenets of Herzberg's two-factor theory, with transformational characteristics mirroring those of motivator factors, and transactional characteristics aligning with hygiene factors. Bram and Winston look at the relationship dynamics between supervisor and supervisee within student affairs, finding most supervisors supervise from a position in which they're most comfortable with, not necessarily ascribing to a transformational or transactional approach. There was significant disconnect found in this relationship pairing, but the disconnect was never connected to satisfaction. However, in line with Massey and Cook's study, relationships built on mutual trust between supervisor and supervisee create increased levels of satisfaction, supporting the hygiene factor, but contradicting Herzberg's two-factor theory overall. A 1997 study by Lacey and Sheehan applied an international lens to satisfaction among higher education employees. So, through an 8-country sample, Herzberg's theory was built upon Hill's 1986 study of faculty job satisfaction. Now, in Hill's study, they found academic faculty to be generally satisfied with their work, and dissatisfaction did arise around absence of hygiene factors, so again, in full support of Herzberg's theory. Lacey and Sheehan did find general agreement with Herzberg's theory, but also found it hard to evaluate some of the data due to the cultural context and diversity within the sample. Ultimately, the authors suggest a one-size approach is not going to fit. Herzberg's theory was an American-centric, American-based, American-created theory, thus the cultural context for its application really need to be evaluated in other cultural settings. Occurring at the same time, Oshigbemi's study of UK faculty job satisfaction found a contradictory finding with Herzberg's two-factor theory, in that a positive relationship with hygiene factors actually increased employee motivation. Now, remember, Herzberg hypothesized that positive relationship with hygiene factors is not going to have an impact on motivation. Support in this study was found with adverse relationships with hygiene factors. Increased dissatisfaction. So Oshigbemi's study partially confirmed and it partially disconfirmed the two-factor theory. The most unique contribution put forth by Oshigbemi was the idea of situational occurrence theory, whereupon employees react to various intrinsic and extrinsic variables as individuals, thus suggesting specific elements of a workplace experience are likely to increase motivation or satisfaction. Across the board is really unlikely. So here we see alignment with the one-size-does-not-fit-all findings of Lacey and Sheehan. Now, Hurt and von Bonsdorf do share agreement with the situational occurrence theory that we will discuss later. In a 2003 study by Rosser and Javinar, they looked at the experiences of 1,166 mid-level student affairs professionals. So as we're shifting here now to the student affairs profession, the focus on mid-level staff is important to note, given this population's demonstrated commitment to the profession, having spent several years in an entry-level position before moving into their current role. So mid-level staff also represent the bulk of employees in student affairs. They are, seemingly stuck, if you will, between senior-level positions and the entry-level roles that they have left. So identifying what factors are associated with persistence or motivation to remain in the field rather than to exit it are worthy of study. Rosser and Javinar shared similar findings that were put forth by Oshigbemi with regard to positive relationships with motivator and hygiene factors as having a positive impact on morale, satisfaction, and commitment. But they did stop short of delineating these characteristics as situational. Instead, recognizing the continuous presence of motivator and hygiene factors in the workplace, favorable views of these factors was found to have positive effects on motivation and commitment. So, with regard to the two-factor model, this supports Herzberg's assertion that positive relationships with motivator factors can have positive impact on employee motivation. But while Herzberg asserts that positive engagement with hygiene factors will not increase motivation, Rosser and Javinar disagree, finding that a positive impact existed with employee motivation. Now, Rosser and Javinar's study may require some follow-up analysis and review when it's compared to the work of Sanker, who aligned with Herzberg's assertion that hygiene factors did not increase motivation, but instead they found positive engagement with between hygiene factors and increased retention. So the retention idea of employees may be misunderstood in the Rosser and Javinar study as motivation to remain in the field. Now, a 2004 study looked at 7 specific variables related to motivation and satisfaction of mid-level staff holding both academic and non-academic positions in higher education. Now, of the 7 variables, 2 could be classified as motivator and 5 as hygiene factors. The findings of this study suggest both of the motivator factors had a positive relationship on motivation and satisfaction, again, lining up with Herzberg's theory, and 2 of the 5 hygiene factors had a positive relationship as well, thus contradicting Herzberg's theory. The other 5 hygiene factors had no impact, which again supports Herzberg's theory. Now, in boiling these findings down, there was strong support for the situational occurrence theory posited by Oshigbemi in the 1997 study. RESR also found that employee satisfaction had an impact on employee morale, which had a determining effect on employees' commitment to their career. However, morale had no impact on employee satisfaction. Now, in the first of its kind study to directly apply Herzberg's two-factor theory to a non-academic population in higher education, Smerk and Peterson studied the impact of motivator and hygiene factors of 2,700 business operations employees. Their study built upon the findings of Volkwin and Parmley, who determined that teamwork, a hygiene factor, to be positively associated with employee satisfaction. That, again, is a contradictory finding of the two-factor model. Now, Smerk and Peterson suggested it is the work itself that, of course, is paramount to impacting motivation and satisfaction. This, of course, is a tenet of the motivator factors of Herzberg's theory. Now, while ultimately Smerk and Peterson cannot conclude with certainty what constitutes job satisfaction in higher education, they do validate some of the findings of Massey and Cook's transformational leadership finding, noting effective supervision was the second strongest predictor of job satisfaction and motivation. Now, the mixed level of findings here support Rosser and Javinar's findings that having positive relationships with motivator and hygiene factors contributes to employee satisfaction and increased motivation. Interestingly enough, though, unique and unexpected in Smerk and Peterson's finding was the role age had as it related to satisfaction, finding that the older the employee, the greater the level of satisfaction that was expressed. Now, again, this wasn't necessarily tied to motivation. A 2006 study by Hurt took a different variable into consideration, looking at the impact of rewards on staff satisfaction and motivation. Now, commonly viewed as haves or have versus have not scenario, that would harken back to the two-factor theory of presence or absence. Here, Hurt looks at rewards from a values-based mentality or institutional scarcity. So, for example, the more rare it is, the more it is valued in producing motivation. One of the examples that really strikes home here is the experiences of student affairs professionals who work at small schools and their ability to work intimately and closely with students from their very first day up until graduation. Now, seeing this maturation and development unfold, being part of that process, is a very rewarding experience for many student affairs professionals. The opportunity to have the experience at a big school the opportunity to have that experience at a big school is much less likely. So such an experience may either be more scarce, increasing a higher, creating a higher value, or the institution may just accept that that's not going to be a reality, and thus it's not part of the reward structure for employees. Now, similarly, in 2011, von Bonsdorf affirmed the reality that people are unique and we are all motivated by different things. The idea of rewards, as Hurt put forth, can be viewed as hygiene factors, may motivate me, but they may not motivate you. Ultimately, both Hurt and von Bonsdorf present ideas that looking at motivation strictly from a lens of intrinsic and extrinsic variables is not presenting the full picture, but that there may be more things in play that cannot be generalized across institutions, public and private, large and small. So toward looking at the other considerations of this study, we begin to find disagreement with previously discussed literature findings, such as Barham and Winston's finding that entry-level staff reported being more satisfied, direct conflict with the previous study that indicated senior-level professionals are the most satisfied with their career. Bender found women in student affairs to be more satisfied than their male counterparts, whereas Ahmed et al. Found just the opposite. Now, it's worth noting that the latter study was done in Pakistan, and a variety of cultural and environmental considerations may need to be applied to those findings as well. So again, harkening back to the idea that each person is unique, Wilson et al. Began looking at the role of personal identities and how they shape and play in employee motivation and satisfaction. Characteristics of one's personal identity, be it gender, age, sexual orientation, education level, ability, found that there were influencing variables associated with one's personal identity that contributed to motivation and satisfaction, primarily associated with the workplace culture and whether or not those were perceived as assets or barriers. Another element of the study was to look at one's life outside of the workplace, variables such as your commute time, community engagement, family structure as impacting the satisfaction and motivation levels reported by participants. As one may expect, the more secure and confident a participant felt in a balance outside of work, the higher the level of reported motivation and satisfaction were reported with regard to their career. Again, these findings harken back to the ideas presented by Oshikvemi in 1997 regarding the situational occurrence theory. Now, in this visual comparison of the major studies discussed in this review, we see that there's generally full or partial confirmation of Herzberg's two-factor theory, given the population for which satisfaction and motivation were studied. We also see that there's conflict and disagreement in applying the theory, and a host of new considerations that have risen in these studies that were not part of Herzberg's original theory. So, in addition to focusing on student affairs staff as the sole population, I think it's also important to look at the contributing factors that may impact responses to satisfaction and motivation, such as identity, age, years of the profession, etc. An application of Herzberg's theory on a one-for-one scale may be influenced by these other factors that are not accounted for. Now, first, in terms of future areas of consideration for further study, I'd be interested in knowing if motivator factors play a more significant role in employee motivation and satisfaction than do an absence of hygiene factors. So, can a leader focus only on motivator factors as a means to increase employee satisfaction in student affairs? Secondly, are hygiene factors viewed differently by those entering the field through a formal graduate program, given the expectations that have been set? So does an individual's acceptance to these facts as they enter the field lessen the significance of hygiene factor impact on job satisfaction and motivation? The third question for exploration mimics that of the literature review. So, as we saw, Herzberg's theory applied to different professions. There was incongruence between studies of faculty, administrators, business employees, and student affairs staff. I would even hypothesize that further subgroups within student affairs, so again, looking back at the different portfolios within student affairs, for example, professionals who have to live on campus, so your residence life staff, as part of their professional role, they may experience different levels of motivation and satisfaction than those who work in recreation or wellness programs, or even those that get to leave campus at 5 o'clock. Similarly, staff members who work in grueling or maybe mentally heavy, taxing professions such as counseling or student discipline may have different views on motivation and hygiene factors than those that work with, the motivated students in campus activities and student leaders. And then a fourth consideration is the translation and definition of hygiene factors, not as hygiene factors, but as rewards. Instead of being present or absent variables. So does a higher salary or even a bonus change an employee's perceived or actualized level of motivation? That concludes the presentation. 3 slides of references here for you. If you do find yourself with any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Look forward to chatting with you about this more. Thanks.